Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Greetings of peace and mercy to you all. Welcome to the first episode of Just Us, Building Restorative Community. My name is Chris, and I will be your host in this episode and those moving forward. This is a show focused on restorative practices, restorative practitioners, and other professionals working to empower our communities to heal and moving from surviving to thriving. In today's episode, I will be introducing myself and how I've gotten here. Thank you for joining. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. That was The Guest House by Rumi. And I start the show with that because I'm hoping that this show can follow in the same format of our lives as being a guest house and bringing people in and allowing them to take their story to not just the radio platform and being able to share their story, but more so to give us a sense of hope and empowerment to continue on with the work we do. My name is Chris. Fully Christopher Orlando Mendez Benedict, son of Shirley Benedict and Jesus Mendez, immigrants of Costa Rica, born and raised in South Florida. I have two official siblings, biological siblings, and many others that were raised in my household with me. I start off by sharing sort of these relationships because first and foremost, I see myself as just an individual in relationship to others. So it's my responsibility to maintain those relationships. And as I've gotten older, those relationships have expanded. As of right now, I'm also a husband and a father, a mediator and a facilitator, and now a radio show host. I am honored with these relationships that have grown in my life and come to mean so much to me. But I also see my collection of experiences as being part of who I am as well, having been the first generation in the United States and coming from a fairly poor family. I was only the second to graduate high school in my family, the first to graduate college. I did go off into the Navy first, and I treasure that time. It was a time of growth and self-discovery that I surely needed at the time. And as I moved forward in life, I got out of the Navy and went back home to South Florida and learned that I like school and continued to do schooling. I was able to complete several degrees as I worked. I was able to go to community college and had some great professors that were able to instill a love for the cliche psychology. So I pursued a degree in psychology, eventually in social psychology, because I was more fascinated in how it is that others, or even the thought of others, affect our behaviors and our decision making and even our own emotions. And so I pursued that, and for a while I was really interested in small group dynamics, and I eventually pursued graduate degrees in conflict analysis and resolution. And throughout this process of schooling, I was able to do a variety of different jobs, from very much blue collar, working in retail, to sort of a more white-collar job, eventually doing academic editing at a university as I was going through graduate school. Eventually I went overseas for a while, and it was an insightful period of time as well, being able to have the experiences of seeing some of the things I learned in grad school with regards to cultural communication, intercultural negotiations, low context versus high context. I was able to see that play out right in front of me and live it and not just read it in a book. which is something I've always appreciated. As much as I love reading books, which I do, I hands down prefer a genuine experience in something as opposed to only reading about it. If I could do both, then that would be better. And after coming back from overseas, I taught middle school and high school for a while, and it was a great honor to be able to have the privilege of sitting in front of youth and to be able to not only share knowledge with them, but being able to grow with them as a person and sharing each other's wisdoms. They shared with me as much as I shared with them. And I look back now, and I often joke around now when I'm doing trainings for educators that I was once a teacher and I understand their demands. But I'm glad I'm not in education anymore, because I was at best a mediocre teacher. But what I did value about that time period is being able to offer a open ear and an open heart to young people when they were in trouble, or even when they wanted to share good news. I was way better of establishing relationships and being a supportive adult, as opposed to strictly being instructional. That was a great time in my life, and I appreciate that. And it certainly feeds into my understanding of how I do my work now. Now I work doing eviction prevention, using mediation, and convincing not only tenants but landlords and policymakers and just the community as a whole that mediation has a role in being able to stabilize people's housing. Being able to have an honest conversation about what the issues are and what is possible and what isn't possible can go very far in resolving conflicts. I'm also a restorative facilitator, do circle, and I also conference in a local high school, and I'm glad that I'm able to do both. I'm able to go from a mediation that might be transactional in nature, but its impact reverberates way further than what you could actually see and keep track of. And I see that to be true when I'm in my school-based services and I'm speaking with young people about what their needs are in order to make better decisions and to repair harm. And housing often comes up as a traumatic event. And I can continue to go on talking about everything I do. My dissertation on a female child soldier, and that's a passion of mine, is trauma in young people and how do we repair that, to now doing the same work, doing trauma work, doing ACEs, adverse childhood experience trainings and presentations. But it would never be enough. I offer at least a glimpse into who I am, a superficial glimpse into who I am, as a means of allowing this show to move forward, knowing that I'm simply a person that comes with a certain set of experiences, and my mind view, my perspective is very much shaped by those experiences. So as limited as my experiences are, my worldview might be, but I seek to move forward and learn in my everyday experiences, in my everyday life, but also with the guests that we bring onto the show. Hopefully I can learn just a little bit more each and every time. This show is very much a continuation of what I see all my other work to be, which is moving forward and identifying ourselves as a community and working to heal ourselves as a community and as individuals, and building up and empowering a community as the foundation for us to move forward. Just as each individual contributes to the stability of the community as a whole also contributes to the stability of the individual. And I decided to name this show Just Us, thanks to a colleague from a great distance from Canada, not too far, being that I'm in Minnesota as of now. But he shared the story that he was in a session with youth, and they said that they really liked Circle and they really liked restorative practices because it was just us. And very much it sounded like justice. And he shared that the interplay that there is between community of just us is what leads to a lasting and deep-rooted dynamic of justice. So I decided to do that and name the show Just Us, because it is just us, and that just us could always be expanded. And everyone is welcome and invited to be part of this community. And the purpose of this is to hopefully bring on individuals who are doing this work, are restorative facilitators, whether they are circle keepers, whether they're trainers, whether they only do conferencing, whatever it may be that they do in their roles of restorative practices. That is the goal, is to bring them in, to highlight their work, because there are many great people doing this work, and many times they're just nested in systems, these bigger systems, and though their work is a shining star in this bigger system, sometimes we can't see it because it is so much bigger. So I wish to take the time and opportunity to highlight their great work, and hopefully they can share some of their wisdom from their experiences. But beyond just restorative practitioners, what I hope to do is also invite guests who are doing great work in other areas that very, very much related to restorative practices. Because restorative practices, and I say restorative practices as opposed to restorative justice because I feel more comfortable in calling it practices because it encompasses more than just the judicial system. And it establishes the fact that being restorative in nature is something that goes beyond just within a certain parameter, within just a certain system, the judicial system or the educational system. But it's something that goes well beyond those boundaries into our intimate relationships, into our collegial relationships, into our acquaintances, into our families. It is something that should permeate throughout. But the show is not just about those restorative practices specifically, because restorative practices is a mindset that takes a holistic approach in that we're a whole person and we have needs across many domains. So the intention is to bring on individuals that are doing great work in other domains, maybe financial literacy amongst young people of color, perhaps some civil rights activists, perhaps some historical trauma education, some mental health and counseling background individuals, some entrepreneurial experts. The intention is to bring on a variety of people that very much plug into a restorative mindset, that as whole individuals we have needs across these domains. The format is very much straightforward. We wish to start with an opening that sort of sets the tone for us, and we get into the discussion and have an honest and genuine conversation about what it is that we're doing and where do we see ourselves currently and how do we see the future of our work. I also wish to take the small time, and though already several minutes into this show, I want to really also expand on the idea of where it is that restorative practices comes from. I am sincerely and genuinely of the opinion that restorative practices are something that are universal and innately part of the human experience, regardless of time or space. Within my local context of Minnesota, the First Nation peoples are locally within the North American context are those teachers of the restorative practices here. If we were to seek these practices around the world, we would see them, from the Jirgas in the Pashtun region of Pakistan and Afghanistan, to the Sahlas of the Arabic communities, to circles within a variety of different African cultures and communities. And so I take a minute and am grateful for the indigenous wisdom being held by the elders and being shared on to generations moving forward, from whatever tradition that may come from. I'm thankful to those teachers and the elders who have upheld these traditions. Is a continuation of modeling the essence of restorative practices of circle, and that is connection on a communal level, connecting not only up and down, as we see in, let's say, our everyday culture, and Western European, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture, where if it is of some direct benefit, material or social, if there's a direct tangible benefit, so working within those power structures, then we establish those connections. But with restorative practices, it's you create and maintain connections. So it's a relational way of being from person to person, despite if there's a tangible benefit or not. And oftentimes it's you supporting others in times when there is no tangible benefit to you directly. But the benefit is for the community. The benefit is for the other, because what benefits others does in turn, and benefits the community, does in turn come back. And we have to really appreciate that in passing down these traditions from one generation to another, the communities that have preserved these practices not only connect themselves with each other within the same time span, but they connect and maintain community with those that came before them. So their ancestors, their forefathers. And I feel like it's no coincidence that these same cultures that have preserved their restorative practices also have a strong value put on honoring and remembering your forefathers, those who came before you. Because it is those who come before us that establish the foundation for our existence, socially and culturally and even materially. So I think a particular benefit is that, and especially when we're talking about taking these practices and expanding them into other settings, aside from just, let's say, a small community, whatever that may look like, whether it's a village, a tribe, a town. When it's expanded beyond that and let's say adopted into systems, and I think this is more of a Western issue, which I know a lot of people end up having difficulties with the idea of adopting restorative practices and systems in the West, or in sometimes not necessarily the West, but in former Western colonies, because it comes off as, and it can be, without a doubt, a colonization of these practices, where it's taken, it's made into a commodity, and then it's repackaged and resold, as opposed to being passed down from generation to generation and shared within community. But I do think it's possible to adopt these practices into systems, so long as the essence of that relational way of being and teaching is maintained. And spending significant amount of time in the classrooms, or in school settings, I should say, I think that is what's missing within a lot of my work. That we wish to adopt restorative practices in educational systems without first shifting, creating pushing forward for a paradigm shift of the adults in the building to not only just teach, but first and foremost be in relation with yourself, with the other adults in the building, with those administrators and district level supervisors, most importantly with those young people that are being taught, those young people that the adults are seeking to connect, those young people that the adult was that said it, but it rung with me true and it stuck. No significant learning occurs outside of significant relationships. This is a truth that cannot be denied. From all of our experience in various educational settings, we all speak, there's this prototype, or there's this mythology around the teacher that we connected with. And I don't think every student has the honor and privilege of having that, and it's a shame because they should. But I think most people can, let's say most adults can probably look back and say, hey, I really connected with this adult in middle school or in high school or even in college, and this person sort of served as a mentor. That relationship is what the experience and really could have made it either a positive experience or at least evened it out to where that positive relationship in the educational setting is what made the negative experience negated against them. But to go back to the original point, it's, we have to be thankful for these practices being preserved in cultures and societies and passed down. And I think most importantly is the opposite of that is, so what about those cultures and societies that did not preserve these practices? And some may argue with me, but I'm without a doubt of the belief that restorative practices is something that's innate to human beings. It is in human nature. It's universal. And I feel that if we perhaps this is an academic endeavor that needs to be taken. If we dig hard enough, we could prop in the roots of any and all cultures across time and space in some form or way. They may differ, without a doubt, they may differ. I'm thinking of the jirgas in Pakistan. They're structured with the elders at the front, or even the Palava huts out of West Africa. They have elders at the front, and there is a hierarchy. But nonetheless, there is, even with a hierarchy built in to their social structure that carries over into this process of restorative justice or restorative practices, there is a transition that occurs in those processes that, hey, everybody has the right to be seen, to participate, and to share, perhaps at a certain turn that's not dependent on where you sit in the circle, but perhaps it's where you sit in the social hierarchy, but nonetheless you have a right to speak. And it's that recognition and acknowledgement of not only your presence, but what you have to share as being valuable, that I think it is a procedural dynamic that shifts the conversations in restorative practices, as opposed to everyday conversations where not everybody necessarily gets the turn or even gets acknowledged in conversations. I think that's something we have to really keep in mind. So we're going to take a short break for now. Welcome back, listeners. This is Chris with Just Us Building Restorative Community. We continue on with this first episode, introducing myself and this work. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy. And so you might ask yourself, I know I certainly ask myself, how did I get here? How did I get into this position of being in the restorative practices world? And the most superficial and obvious way you could say is, well, my degrees got me here. My bachelor's in social psychology, of being obsessed with how people interact with each other and how we affect each other, to my master's and my PhD in conflict analysis and resolution, academia. But while I was in grad school, I distinctly remember being really passionate, and I still hold this passion. We've been really passionate about the role of conflict resolution processes, such as mediation, negotiation, arbitration, conferencing, whatever it may be, in the role of communities of non-white Anglo-Saxon Christians within the United States. And to be more specific, I say that I'm a Muslim, and I've always been fairly active in the Muslim community and community endeavors. So as I was going through grad school and I'm studying all these processes, I knew that that's what we needed within our own community, because as I learned more about Islam and how it innately called for the resolution of conflicts in peaceful ways, in holistic ways, in communal ways, I also saw that there was a gap, and we lacked the procedural knowledge, wisdom, whether through practice or through study. We were lacking it. So I became very passionate and obsessed of trying to develop in my own mind this approach, an Islamic conflict resolution approach, based on principles and processes that I was learning. But the further I got into it, the more frustrated I became. I knew I wasn't ready to take on an endeavor of that magnitude at that point in time, but I still maintained a passion for it. And at the same time, as I was finishing grad school, though my passion was in Islamic conflict resolution, I also had this deep-rooted sense of respect and perhaps indebtedness to a certain person in my life, an older female in my life, for her experiences. And I wanted to highlight her experiences and take that wisdom and share it with the world, because I knew I benefited directly from her experiences. And so my dissertation while I was in grad school, I was finishing up, was on the life history of a female child soldier. A female child soldier who at the age of 14 left home and eventually made her way through the mountains into Nicaragua and joined the Sandinista guerrillas and fought and was a combat fighter up until even the liberation or ending of the civil war in Nicaragua, to where the Sandinistas took control. And she was there for a few months after after that, where she just maintained patrols in the capital city of Managua. But her experiences of such extreme trauma had developed a sense of resilience and strength that you could notice right away, but that she had a way of sharing with me and with those who would listen to her, who would pay attention to what she had to share. And that certainly had its way of shaping how I saw the world and how I appreciated individuals and what I expected of myself. And I knew that young people, vulnerable people, were most in need of adults being accountable to their well-being. As adults, we have to hold ourselves up as being supports to the young people and sort of trying to correct our own wrongs. And so that very much informed my teaching experience while I was a middle school and high school teacher. And as I met young people and I heard their stories, I attempted to be that support for them as much as I could, out of genuine care for them as individuals, as humans, because I didn't just see them as lesser than, as youth, as kids, as children, but I saw them as people who were just younger and perhaps just needed somebody to listen to their issues, even if I might have not thought that they were as big as what I thought they were. They needed somebody with an open heart and an open mind to listen to them and just be there for them. And it certainly opened up to even more layers of trauma within our communities, of these experiences that haunt individuals and haunt communities as a whole. And as I continued to move forward, I knew that I didn't want to stay in teaching and I wanted to get into my field. I was itching to get into my field. And so when I finished my dissertation in December of 2014, I sort of had dead set that I wanted to move forward and move into my own field. And I finished teaching that school year, and I didn't sign up again for another contract teaching, and I gave myself the make it or break it sort of ultimatum. And I was able to land a position for a while, a temporary position, being a case manager for undocumented youth and trying to connect them with their families, and again listening to their stories and trying to be that support for them. But it didn't really fulfill what I wanted to do, what I saw myself doing, and perhaps that was because of the systems in place. But it was a great experience nonetheless. But it resulted in this time period of unemployment and being what I would consider myself a hardworking individual who had several college degrees. I found it very frustrating that I couldn't land myself into a position. Probably the most frustrating was constantly being told that I was underqualified with regards to experience in the conflict resolution world, but I was overqualified academically. So I could never really get my foot in the door, though they would sometimes open it. And that unemployment was, I would say, a needed dark chapter, a low point in my life that tested my patience, it tested my grit, it tested my overall desire to continue moving forward in this field. It even tested my personal relationships with my children, with my wife, with my family. And eventually I was able to get I found a posting for a fellowship. And mind you, I'm coming from academia, so I'm thinking academic fellowship. AmeriCorps Vista Fellowship. And I applied. And the organization called me back, and we interviewed, and we fell in love with each other. And they told me about all the work that they were doing with housing mediation and restorative practices. And I said, I love it, I want to do it. And they said, okay, we need a decision within a week. And on the surface, that seems like a easy decision to make, but at the time I was living in South Florida and with my family, and this position was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, quite a distance away. And I had to make that decision whether I was going to take a chance of taking what eventually I learned was this, basically government program, a fellowship of, service to your community, a principle that I valued. I still value very much, but that would pay less than $1,000 a month and have me move across the country. But I knew that it was the right decision after consulting with my family, and in my heart I knew it was the right decision. And I took that leap, and I said yes, and then I made whatever series of choices that were necessary to make that decision, that initial decision of taking the position. of making it happen. And I moved to Minneapolis in August of 2017, and I started my Vista Fellowship at Community Mediation and Restorative Services. And very much for the first year, and as a Vista, my role was capacity building. So it was great. It was about developing programs and developing our capacity as an organization to continue this work. As part of those experiences and expanding programs, I had to be deeply rooted in the work itself. And my experience mediating cases, whether housing cases or harassment cases or conciliation cases or family cases, grew. In addition, my experiences with restorative diversions that we did with restorative conferences, holding conferences with youth and their families and community members and sometimes victims, and being able to discuss about when something went wrong, and about holding ourselves accountable, and about providing support to these young people to repair those harms and to move forward in a better way, equipped with better decision making perhaps. Those experiences continue to grow. And I say more than anything, it came to be where that year was a culmination where several strands of experiences and interests and passions throughout my life, of whether it was trauma-related work with young people, community activism and empowerment, and conflict resolution, they all came together and came in fruition in this position, in this work at this organization, where I was able to do all these things and incorporate everything. And I'm very grateful at this point in time for that. Being a man of faith, I thank God every day for that opportunity. And I move forward in a sense of gratitude, hoping to do the good work that I know is expected of us. And hoping that my mistakes are minimal in nature, and that I realize them, and when I do make them, and I'm able to correct them as I move forward. But that position of a Vista Fellowship was the game changer. And I look back now, and I often joke around about my moving to Florida, or moving from Florida to Minnesota. And I say that what brought me up here was the mediation. I initially was more interested in the mediation, but as I got exposed to the restorative practices explicitly, and I had written papers on restorative practices within the justice system, but actually having those firsthand experiences, being in circle and being in conferences and facilitating conferences and just digging deeper into it with each and every experience, I joke around and say that mediation is what brought me to Minnesota, but restorative practices is what kept me here. And it still is very much true. I see restorative practice as being that bigger picture, that bigger goal in my life, not only personally but professionally. And without a doubt, I feel that mediation and other processes have their role, but certainly restorative practices is what can make the difference in not only the lives of individuals, but in the lives of the communities in which they live in or they might move into. That is the difference. And I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for being in the situation that Vista was able to put me in. I'm grateful that I'm able to do restorative practices in schools and through juvenile court diversions and through police diversions, keeping the record of youths clean, and even just preventing or minimizing suspensions. Of being able to do trauma work and trauma-related work, being able to discuss the long-term effects of trauma and how we can find resilience within our experiences and do those trainings. And even being part of projects that are seeking to reform whole state justice systems based on the wisdom of youth participants, and a variety of other miscellaneous opportunities that I'm given. I'm very grateful for that. But I think what I'm most grateful for is the opportunity that I was able to become a circle keeper, and I was able to share that with my children. I'm able to talk with them in a better way, hold myself accountable in a better way, hold them accountable in a better way. And I even keep circle with my children, and I try to teach them and how to do it as well. And it's always a fun experience, especially when my 4-year-old tries to keep circle. And she wants to talk about her rocks and how important they are to her. But it reminds me that I need to listen to what's important to her, even if it is just her shiny rocks. And so though I found that I was in a place of darkness when I was unemployed for that long, it was well over 12 months, I knew that it was preparing me for where I'm at now. There is an abundance of work to do. And so when I get frustrated that there's so much work to do, I remind myself that it wasn't necessary for that opportunity to be given to me, but it was. And I'm blessed to be able to be given the chance to do this work. And so I owe the community my efforts and my work, not because I am any better, but merely because I'm a servant of the community. Welcome back, listeners. This is Chris with Just Us Building Restorative Community. We continue on with this first episode, introducing myself and this work. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy. So with regards to the future of how I see myself and how I see restorative practices, I'm given hope every time I hear about either a new school or a new state or maybe a new institution, a new system that's seeking to implement restorative practices into their existence, into their framework. It certainly gives me hope. Matter of fact, just recently I was given that hope that when I heard that Miami-Dade County Public Schools was experimenting with restorative justice, with restorative practices. They called it restorative justice practices. And that gave me a great sense of hope. But I'm also very cautious and concerned about the unfortunate commodification of these practices, of this way of being, and the desire for systems to create processes and programs that are very limited in scope, despite the fact carrying the name restorative practices. I am wholeheartedly a believer that restorative practice is not just a set of processes or procedures, but it is a way of being. It is a way of how we see each other and engage each other in a way that is valuing the innate worth in others. And I'm new to this field, you could say, and so my sort of simple wisdom that I take for myself first and foremost. I take this advice myself first and foremost, and I would hope that leaders in positions of authority that are thinking of using restorative practices, that they would think about slowing down and understanding the situation. And what I mean by that is we can't just use cookie cutter processes and procedures and programs and just throw them anywhere and expect great results. We have to understand the situations. We have to understand the context. We have to understand the actors within those contexts. And that not only goes for programs as a whole, within a school or within a district, but also within each and every interaction that occurs. Each conference is not going to be the same. Each circle is not going to be the same. We have to slow down and we have to take into account that each situation is different. And we have to develop strategies for being able to address those situations as we move forward, in ways that are not only fulfilling the objectives that we go in to do, but that also are in line with the principles that we hold as a community and the standards that we have for ourselves as practitioners in this field. And as people, as humans, I think one of the areas where I find the greatest hope is in the idea of restorative practices taking hold very organically within communities and allowing it to expand within communities so that communities take full ownership of their own conditions. I'm often reminded of an Islamic ideal that says that the condition of a people will not change until they change what's within themselves. And I see that as being the opportunity for us as individuals taking the time to know what we need and what we want, and then looking back and seeing what the community needs and wants and balancing those. And I'm hopeful when I hear of communities developing institutions that might be considered parallel institutions. I'm hopeful of the situation we find ourselves in. I look to some of the Central and South American indigenous communities that sometimes take forceful control of their communities and of their own governance, and ensure that they develop their own parallel institutions and not rely on these imposed on systems from colonial powers. And so when communities are able to organically and naturally just expand their own abilities and they take ownership of their realities, that's where I'm hopeful that restorative practices is going to make the biggest difference. Eventually, I do not hide the fact that eventually, I think many years perhaps down the road, I want to see whether it's that I help to carry it down there, whether it's that I help to grow it down there, or just be a part of continuing the movement. I want to see community mediation, but in particular restorative practices, take hold in Florida, but in South Florida in particular, the region that I call home. I was born and raised in Hollywood, Florida, a suburb of Fort Lauderdale, but somewhere dead smack in the middle between Fort Lauderdale and Miami. And that is the dream for me, to be able to be back home and doing this work that I love so much and that I believe in so much, and that I see the potential of changing communities and systems and just some of the conditions we find ourselves in, and being able to share that with youth that are walking the same streets that I once walked and in the schools that I was once in. That is the dream for me. My hope for the future of the show is that it is inviting to people, to all people, to not only engage what we discuss, perhaps carry those conversations into other more private conversations, but certainly into eventually creating a dynamic discussion that might be online through social media or other means. But my hope is that not only the listeners become a part of this community of restorative practices, but that the guests that come on this show become part of your community of listeners, and they're able to take what they're doing further, and communities are able to continue doing with the work that they're doing. The continued intention of this program, like I said earlier, would be to invite strong leaders, both young and old alike, of a variety of different backgrounds and races and genders and all those different labels that we throw on ourselves. There is an open invitation to sit down and discuss how it is that we support our communities and build our communities. because restorative practices is intentionally a holistic approach to being, and those individuals doing their niche work that I know I wouldn't be able to do. I want them to be able to, the limelight to be shown on them, and so that we as a community can celebrate their work. It's not for a matter of fame or just popularity, but simply to celebrate each other. When we're able to see the great things that we do, we're able to continue to support each other in those great things that we do. And not only that, many times those people that are doing good work, when others hear of it, we are encouraged and empowered. When I hear of other individuals' work, I am given a sense of strength from that to be able to continue not only doing the work I'm doing, because it might be an uphill battle, but it's a worthy battle. But I see that they might be tackling problems in different ways that I'd never thought of, and they might be considering certain factors that I never thought of, and I'm able to learn and expand my understanding of issues and problems and how it relates to my work and to just my day-to-day life. But I'm also able to perhaps turn around and help them and offer my support in whatever small way that may be. That is the intention behind this show, is to continue to build a community, a restorative community, a healing community. We hope that we can move forward in a collaborative effort, in a well-intentioned effort, and in a manner that is befitting to our community. I close this show with an apology that anything good that I say, whether in this episode or moving forward, is from the wisdom beyond myself, and anything wrong that I say that might be short-sighted or hurtful or ignorant is from the weakness of my own humanity. And I ask you first and foremost for your forgiveness, and second, for you to support me and engage me in a discussion that would be to my benefit, to increase my understanding and to help me do better and be better. And now I end with the closing, which is probably one of my favorite poems, that, though short, it gives me a sense of hope. It's a poem by Emily Dickinson, and it's called "Hope is the Thing with Feathers." Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And the sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. And once again, I wish to express a sense of gratitude to the listeners. I hope this conversation was of benefit and at a minimum of entertainment. If you have any questions for me, Chris, here at Just Us, Building Restorative Community, feel free to reach out via email, comendez83@gmail.com. Again, you can reach out to me for comments, concerns, and questions at comendez83@gmail. Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye.
Quiero contarle, mi hermano, un pedacito de la historia negra, de la historia nuestra, caballero. Y dice así. los años 1600, cuando el tirano mandó las calles de Cartagena, aquella historia vivió. Cuando aquí llegaban esos negreros africanos en cadenas, besaban mi tierra, esclavitud perpetua. Esclavitud perpetua. Esclavitud perpetua. Que lo diga Salomé. Un matrimonio africano, esclavos de un